Israel's genocidal campaign against Gaza has many pillars to it, and one of them has been the execution of a strategy described by Israel's former head of the country's National Security Council, Giora Eiland, who is now advisor to Defence Minister Yoav Gallant, when at the very start of this horror, he endorsed the Israeli siege in Gaza with the advice the people should be told that they have two choices, to stay and starve or leave. He declared Israel needed to create what he declared was a severe humanitarian crisis in Gaza, demanding that Gaza becomes an area where people cannot live, that Israel must create in Gaza such a terrible, unbearable situation that can last weeks and months. Now, as part of his strategy to make this happen, he wrote that as well as the total cutting off of the essentials of life, as Defence Minister Yoav Gallant had ordered, that to make that happen, he said, in order to make the siege effective, we have to prevent others from giving assistance to Gaza. Listen to that again. We have to prevent others from giving assistance to Gaza. Very important. That has meant in practice the mass slaughter of aid workers. Indeed, at least 254 aid workers are known to have been killed, the biggest slaughter of aid workers ever recorded in any conflict in such a short space of time ever. Indeed, by the beginning of April, that is the beginning of last month, Israel had killed more aid workers in Gaza, a strip of land no bigger than East London, than in all of the countries in the rest of the world combined in any of the last 30 years. Now, I'm going to revisit a notorious example with some evidence which for some reason has been completely disregarded. But let's first start with a new report from Human Rights Watch, which looks at aid strikes and aid workers' convoys in premises, even though aid groups gave their coordinates to the Israeli authorities to ensure their protection. None of the aid workers were given advance warnings. None of the aid organisations before these attacks got such warnings, in which at least 31 aid workers and those with them were killed or injured. Let's listen to Belkis Willi from Human Rights Watch talking about this on Democracy Now!
In armed conflicts around the world, there's something known as a humanitarian deconfliction system. This is a system employed where aid organizations, UN agencies will transmit to the warring parties GPS coordinates of their locations, both moving convoys and fixed locations like guest houses where their staff are sleeping, or hospitals, other facilities where they're operating. And the intention of transmitting those coordinates is to ensure that those locations do not come under attack, because this is where aid activities are being carried out. And what's really striking in the context of Gaza and these military operations is how many times we've seen attacks on aid workers, whether it's in their guest houses or, again, as they're moving in convoy, where those attacks come exactly at the locations that the Israeli authorities know about.
Now, in one such example, on the 18th of January, 3 people were injured in an Israeli attack while staying in a joint guest house belonging to 2 aid organisations, likely carried out with a US-made munition delivered by an F-16 aircraft which uses British-made components. Now, the victims of the attacks include the aid agencies Médecins Sans Frontières, who suffered attacks on a convoy, shelter and a guest house separately, on UNRWA, the main humanitarian agency in Gaza, that's the UN agency for Palestinian refugees, which Israel has raised an unevidenced smear campaign against, with attacks on a guest house and a convoy, as well as an attack on a guest house belonging to the International Rescue Committee, headed by the former Labour politician David Miliband, and Medical Aid for Palestinians. Now, there's new analysis by Forensic Architecture, a research agency based at Goldsmiths, the University of London. Their analysis of reported data identifies at least 80 separate attacks by Israel on aid in Gaza since January. They write, the frequency and widespread nature of these attacks suggests that Israel is systematically targeting aid. They detail at least 37 attacks on civilians seeking aid. They have a disclaimer. They say these findings are preliminary and non-exhaustive. What is the combined consequence of these attacks? It deters, of course, aid agencies from doing their life-saving work, because they know they are placing their aid workers in danger, as well as, of course, deterring Palestinian civilians for looking for aid. The combined consequences: more starvation and Palestinians deprived of the essentials of life. Now, let's revisit the World Central Kitchen massacre at the beginning of April, when 7 aid workers were killed in Gaza, foreign aid workers, largely, it does not and should not detract from the horror of what happened to these aid workers to point out that the presence of Westerners amongst the fatalities gave their deaths international attention, while Palestinian aid workers who've been butchered have been routinely ignored, their deaths, that is. Now, this massacre is telling. World Central Kitchen worked with the so-called Israel Defense Forces. In this case, they offered up their coordinates on a pre-approved route. Their trucks had massive World Central Kitchen logos on them. There were no armed men in the convoy, we'll come on to that. The vehicles in the convoy were far apart. They were then methodically attacked one by one. The first attacks, the survivors go to the next vehicle. That was then attacked. Then the survivors go to the final vehicle. During the attack, the IDF was radioed to tell them the convoy was being attacked. The final vehicle attacked. Everybody killed. Now, the Israeli investigation was a whitewash, in which the authorities declared that it was a grave mistake, but there had been no intentional harm, with officers dismissed, but no criminal action taken against them. And having listened to the information I've given you there, just take a moment to absorb what I just said. In a statement, World Central Kitchen declared that the IDF preliminary investigation found that the IDF had deployed deadly force without regard to its own protocols, chain of command and rules of engagement. The IDF has acknowledged that our teams followed all proper communications procedures. The IDF's own video fails to show any cause for fire in our personnel convoy, which carried no weapons and posed no threat. They added, "We demand the creation of an independent commission to investigate the killings of our WCK colleagues. The IDF cannot credibly investigate its own failure in Gaza." Well, indeed. Now, who was, let's go on to this, shall we? Who was the most senior IDF commander in this attack on the World Central Kitchen convoy? He's a man named Colonel Nochi Mandel. He's a far-right extremist and a settler in the illegally occupied West Bank. 2.5 months before the attack, he signed an open letter directed at the Israeli War Cabinet and the IDF Chief of Staff, which implored them to do everything in your power not to allow humanitarian supplies and the operation of hospitals inside Gaza Strip following its evacuation. Now, some might go, well, that just shows he's not representative of Israeli state policy. But it doesn't work like that. At the very start, Yoav Gallant, as I've said, very notoriously declared Israel was imposing a total siege on all the essentials of life and getting into Gaza on the grounds that Israel was fighting human animals. In subsequent separate statements, very shortly after this, he declared that all restraints and all restrictions would be lifted on Israeli soldiers. He directly addressed that to Israeli soldiers themselves. So the defense minister in charge of Israel's war effort made clear at the start that Israel intended to starve Gaza of the essentials of life and that the Israeli army would be granted impunity. How, therefore, are we supposed to understand the biggest slaughter of aid workers in a conflict in such a short space of time ever, including multiple examples when aid agencies offered coordinates to the Israeli army where they were housed in known locations designated to those aid agencies, when they were given no prior warning before any attack? Are all of these just one-offs? Terrible tragedies, accidents? Where does this leave claims by the Israeli military? It's one of the most sophisticated and advanced armies on earth. So it's just one big coincidence that the Israeli defense minister announced the essentials of life would be cut off, that soldiers would have impunity, and that his advisor, a general no less, and the former head of Israel's National Security Council called for those delivering aid to be deliberately targeted to ensure the success of the siege, which was announced by the defence minister he's advising. Now, the preeminent British barrister Michael Mansfield KC responded to this incident by rightly declaring the document is plainly relevant to a particular state of mind. In other words, it is not indicating that the target of the Israeli army is primarily Hamas, but Gaza as a whole by weaponizing aid under siege conditions. Do you want to hear another twist? Well, listen to this. And bear in mind, this is in The Telegraph, a right-wing newspaper with a committed pro-Israel editorial line, before we're accused of being tinfoil hat-wearing conspiracists. The investigation into Colonel Mandel and his colleagues was led by retired Major General Yoav Har-Evan, President and CEO of Rafael Advanced Defense Systems. It says, sparking claims of bias. Well, wait for it. Just wait for it. The Telegraph says the IDF is one of Rafael's biggest buyers. The company which sells nearly half of its arms to Israeli clients makes the Spike missiles, which are reported to have been used to kill the aid workers. Are you kidding me? What do you even say? What do you even say? The Telegraph article also had some other choice details. The alleged failure to realise the cars belong to WCK is perplexing for a number of reasons, but mainly because the entire WCK operation had been approved in advance by the IDF and had been tracked for hours, almost certainly days, by the IDF and its drones. The IDF said the vehicle's roof markings were not visible to its drones at night, but the drones had tracked the WCK aid agency convoy from the beach, where the supplies had been landed on a pier built a few weeks before under the glare of world media attention. The trucks were then tracked all the way to WCK's warehouse in Deir al-Balah, Warehouse A. According to the IDF, the same journey had been made the previous day and several times before. Each journey was approved by and closely monitored by the IDF. The Telegraph also mentions that in a briefing by an Israeli Major General, someone watching the video feed from one of the drones thought that one of the people getting into one of the vehicles was carrying a weapon. But the article then says, however, when the video was rerun for the investigators, there was no sign of that. No footage of this moment was provided, reported the BBC from the briefing. But the military investigation concluded it was a misclassification. They saw that it's a rifle, but at the end of the day, it was a bag. Now, just a very basic question. Where are all the loud demands from Britain, the United States and Australia for an independent investigation into the killing of their own citizens? For all the relevant footage to be released unedited for independent analysis. If Hamas had been responsible, can you imagine how they would have responded? The brutal truth is that the Israeli state is clearly deliberately targeting aid agencies and aid workers as part of a deliberate strategy of starving the people of Gaza. And that is a key plank of what is a genocide. As ever, you just need to do two things. Listen to what Israeli leaders and officials say and look at the overwhelming material evidence of what they then did. It isn't hard, and those currently loudly refuting what we are saying would be arriving at the exact same conclusions as us if it wasn't a state allied to the West responsible for all of this. And what's more, they know it. Please like and subscribe. Do leave your comments. Do share. Help us take on the Pro War Media Zero at patreon.com/OJ84. Listen to the podcast. I'll speak to you soon.